If you had to pick the worst time in history to need a job, you might think of war, famine, plague, maybe the Bronze Age collapse, maybe medieval Europe. But actually, the worst jobs in history weren't defined by the era. They were defined by what the job made you do every single day, regardless of the century, regardless of the civilization. These are the 5 worst jobs in ancient history, ranked by how quickly they would break a modern person. And number 1 would end most of us in a week. Number 5, Roman urine collector. The Roman economy ran on urine, not as a metaphor, literally. Urine was one of the most valuable industrial chemicals in the ancient world. It contains ammonia, which was used to tan leather, clean wool, whiten teeth, and treat cloth before dyeing. So someone had to collect it. The urine collectors were called fullones when they worked in the laundries, and they set up collection vessels at street corners and outside public baths across every Roman city. Their job was to walk a route, like a milkman, but the opposite, collecting what people left behind. Then they took it back to the fulling mill. At the fulling mill, fresh urine was poured into large stone vats. Workers, called fullers, stood in these vats and trampled cloth underfoot. For hours. Bare feet. Roman street urine. All day. The ammonia in the urine loosened the fibers of the wool and cleaned the fabric. This was not an informal operation. Vespasian, one of Rome's most respected emperors, imposed a tax on the urine trade. When his son complained that the tax was undignified, Vespasian held up a gold coin earned from the tax and said, "Pecunia non olet." Money does not smell. The phrase is still used in Italian today. The workers in the fulling mills didn't get to say that. They smelled constantly. Their skin absorbed the ammonia. They were known throughout Roman cities and kept at a specific social distance. At the end of a shift, a fuller would walk home through Rome, past the temples and the markets and the forums and the crowds, smelling like precisely what they had been standing in all day. They were paid. It was steady work. The empire needed them. They also smelled like Rome's toilets for the rest of their lives. That's number 5. Number 4, Egyptian embalmer. Ancient Egypt had a very specific relationship with death. They believed that the body needed to be preserved for the afterlife, which meant that for every person of sufficient status who died, someone had to do what happened next. The embalmers were called WT, the wrapped ones, and their work was divided by specialization in a way that reflects both how complex and how genuinely terrible the job was. The incision man made the first cut, one cut along the left side of the abdomen. Then he ran. He ran because the moment he made the incision, the other embalmers were required, by ritual law, to curse him and throw things at him. This is documented in ancient texts. The logic? The violation of a human body was a sacred transgression, even when necessary. Someone had to absorb the ritual punishment for it. The incision man took the abuse and left. Then the internal organs were removed. The stomach, intestines, liver, and lungs were removed, treated with natron salt, and placed in canopic jars. The brain was extracted through the nostril using a long, hooked tool. It was considered unimportant and discarded. The heart was left in place. It was needed for judgment in the afterlife. The body cavity was then packed with natron salt and left to dry for 40 days. After 40 days, the cavity was cleaned, packed with linen, sawdust, or other material to restore the body's shape, and the wrapping began. Wrapping a single body took approximately 15 days of work. Strips of linen were applied in a specific pattern, with resin between each layer. Amulets were placed at specific points. Prayers were spoken over each wrapping. The process was careful, skilled, and deeply strange. The embalmers worked in a specific area called the Ibu, the tent of purification, located near the Nile. The smell of decomposing bodies in Egypt's climate made working near populated areas impossible. The job paid well. The embalmers were respected. They were also isolated, permanently associated with death, and spent their entire careers handling human remains in desert heat. The best embalmers in Egypt were employed by pharaohs and nobles. They learned their techniques through apprenticeship, father to son, generation after generation, in families that specialized in death for centuries. That's number 4. Number 3, Roman gladiator. Most people think gladiators had it the worst. They're wrong about why. The combat was violent, obviously, but the part that most people don't think about is what gladiators' lives were like between fights. Gladiators were mostly slaves or convicted criminals. They lived in gladiatorial schools, called ludi, under conditions that were, in some ways, surprisingly good, because they were valuable property. A good gladiator represented a significant investment. Lanistas, the men who owned and trained them, had financial incentive to keep them fed, medically treated, and in fighting condition. Gladiators ate a specific high-carbohydrate diet, largely barley and beans, that gave them a layer of body fat that protected their organs during combat. Analysis of gladiator bone remains has confirmed this diet. They were known as barley men. They had access to physicians, including one named Galen, who would later become one of the most important doctors in Roman history. He learned anatomy largely by treating gladiator wounds. They were fed well. They were medically cared for. Their bodies were owned. Each time a gladiator entered the arena, they faced not just their opponent, but the crowd. The crowd's judgment determined whether a fallen gladiator lived or died. A good crowd response might mean a defeated fighter survived. A bad one meant the missio, the request for mercy, was denied. The average active career of a gladiator was approximately 2 to 5 years. Some survived longer. Some didn't survive their first fight. The psychological dimension is the part that makes this number 3. Gladiators trained for months or years for fights that lasted minutes. They formed bonds with training partners who they might then fight and be required to kill. They were paraded through the streets before events and cheered by crowds who would watch them bleed later the same day. They became famous. People wanted to touch them, follow them, paint their names on walls. And then they stepped into the sand, and the gate closed behind them. Some gladiators retired and became trainers. Some bought their freedom with prize money over time. Some were granted freedom after exceptional performance. Most didn't get that far. That's number 3. Number 2, ancient Greek silver mine worker. In 483 BC, Athens discovered a massive vein of silver at Laurion, south of the city. This silver funded the Athenian navy. The Athenian navy won the Battle of Salamis. The Battle of Salamis saved Greece from Persian conquest. Athens became the cultural center of the ancient world. The workers who mined the silver were slaves. The Laurion silver mines operated with approximately 20,000 slaves at their peak. These were not the somewhat protected slaves of the gladiatorial schools. These were people sent underground with oil lamps and chisels to work in passages sometimes less than half a meter wide. The tunnels at Laurion were cut to follow the silver veins, which meant they went wherever the silver went, sideways, downward, at angles that made no concession to the human body navigating them. passages that required workers to crouch, crawl, and push through rock for their entire shift. The lamps consumed the available oxygen. The work generated heat and dust. The dust from silver ore mining contains lead, arsenic, and other heavy metals. Analysis of skeletons from around Lorient shows severe and systematic physical damage from a young age. Spinal compression, joint damage, lung disease. Workers were typically assigned in shifts. The night shift worked in complete darkness except for their single oil lamp. They could not stand. They could not turn around in many sections. They worked by feel and by the lamp's limited circle of light. They were shackled for much of their time underground. The silver they mined funded the most famous democratic city in history. The Parthenon, the philosophy, the theater, the Olympics, all of it ran on revenue that came from underground passages where men who were legally property chipped at rock in the dark. Athens understood this. They wrote about it. Xenophon proposed expanding the slave workforce at Lorient as a financial investment for the state. The slaves are never named. That's number 2. Number 1. Ancient Roman garum producer. You might be expecting number 1 to be something involving combat, or disease, or physical danger. Number 1 is a food production job. Garum was the most important condiment in the ancient world. Rome ran on it. Everyone used it. The poor poured cheap garum on grain. The rich aged premium garum in sealed amphorae for years. It was traded across the entire empire. Pompeii had a major garum industry. Spain had a garum industry. It went everywhere Roman civilization went. Garum was made from fish. Specifically, it was made from whole fish, heads, scales, intestines, organs, everything, layered with salt in large stone vats and left in the sun. For months, the mixture fermented, the fish decomposed slowly in the salt, the proteins broke down. After 3 to 12 months, a clear brownish liquid settled at the top. That liquid was garum. It was pressed and filtered and bottled and sold as the most widely used flavoring in Roman cuisine. The vats were kept outside. The process generated a smell of decomposing fish in Mediterranean summer heat that was so severe that garum production facilities were legally required to be located outside city walls in Rome itself, not near the edge of the city, outside the walls entirely. The workers at these facilities managed the fermentation process. They stirred the vats at intervals. They checked the progress of decomposition. They worked next to open stone containers of sun-fermented fish organs for their entire shifts, every day, for months on end, until a batch was ready. Then they started a new batch. Roman texts describe garum workers as unable to attend social events in the city because the smell became permanent. Their clothing absorbed it. Their skin absorbed it. Washing did not remove it. They produced the empire's most prized condiment. They could not have dinner in the city that consumed it. The irony is this: garum, which smelled so terrible to produce, tastes remarkable. Modern recreations using the same technique, salt, whole fish, months of fermentation, produce a condiment described by food historians as deeply savory, complex, and unlike anything else. The taste and the production are so completely disconnected from each other that the workers who made it may never have actually known what it tasted like at the table. They processed the fish. They managed the rot. They lived in the smell. Someone else enjoyed the result. That's number 1. And honestly, for a 10-minute video about ancient suffering, it's exactly the right note to end on. Subscribe if you want part 2. There are worse jobs. We have a list.